My chair was gone before 9 in the morning. Not moved. Gone. Every chair on the fourth floor had vanished overnight, and taped to my monitor was a memo from my manager that said standing increases productivity and focus, effective immediately, no exceptions. I stood there in my heels reading it twice, thinking this had to be a joke, but nobody was laughing. My manager, a man named Gary who wore his tie too tight and his ego too loose, stood by the elevator watching me read it, arms crossed, like he had just won something. He had not won anything. Not yet. But he thought he had, and that mistake was about to cost him more than he ever imagined. I need to back up a little so you understand why Gary hated me enough to do something this ridiculous. 3 weeks earlier, I had filed a formal complaint against him with HR. Not about the chairs, that came later. I filed it because Gary had been forcing our whole team to work through lunch, off the clock, calling it team bonding, and when I refused one day because I had a doctor's appointment, he wrote me up for what he called a bad attitude. I fought that right up. I brought printouts of the emails where he told us lunch was mandatory. HR sat there, uncomfortable, promising they would look into it. Gary found out I had filed that complaint. I don't know how, but office walls have ears, and apparently so did his best friend in HR, a woman named Denise who conveniently sat 2 doors from my file. And that is when Gary decided to punish the entire department instead of just me, because if everyone suffered, maybe everyone would blame me instead of him. So the chairs disappeared, and the memo appeared, and Gary smiled like a man who had just discovered a loophole nobody else could see. Here is the thing about Gary. He was clever in the way a fox is clever, but not smart in the way a fox needs to be smart to actually survive. He assumed that removing chairs and calling it a wellness initiative would be annoying enough to make people quit complaining, but not illegal enough for anyone to challenge him. He forgot one very important detail. Our company had an employee handbook, updated less than 6 months earlier, that included a very specific accessibility and ergonomics policy, one that Gary himself had signed off on in a meeting I happened to be sitting in. That policy stated, word for word, that all employees must be provided with a seating option that meets OSHA and ADA standards unless a documented medical or operational exception is filed and approved by HR in writing. Gary had filed nothing. Approved nothing. Documented nothing. He just took the chairs. I did not yell. I did not storm into his office. I smiled, thanked him for the memo, and went straight to my desk to start collecting evidence, because if there is one thing corporate life teaches you, it is that paper trails win wars that shouting never could. I photographed every empty chair space. I saved the memo. I pulled up the handbook policy and highlighted the exact paragraph. Then I quietly asked 3 co-workers, people Gary had also worn down over the months, if they would be willing to put their names on a joint written complaint if it came to that. All 3 said yes immediately, because apparently standing 8 hours a day on hard tile floors in dress shoes creates instant unity among strangers. By day 3, people were suffering. Marcus in accounting has a bad knee from an old football injury. Priya was 7 months pregnant and swelling by noon. An older gentleman named Walter, who had worked there for 11 years, started using an upside-down recycling bin as a seat, and Gary walked past him and laughed, actually laughed, and told him bins build character. That was the moment I stopped feeling nervous about what I was about to do and started feeling calm instead. I did not go to Gary. I went straight to HR, and I did not go to Denise. I requested, in writing, a meeting with the HR director, a woman named Susan Whitfield who Gary had never actually met in person because she mostly handled legal compliance and only stepped in for serious matters. I brought the photos. I brought the memo. I brought the handbook. I brought a written statement, signed by Marcus, Priya, and Walter, describing physical discomfort, medical concerns, and lost productivity from standing all day with zero accommodation and zero approved documentation. Susan read through everything without saying a single word, which honestly was more terrifying than if she had reacted immediately. Then she looked up and asked one simple question. Did management provide any medical exception paperwork for this policy change? I said no. None. I said as far as I knew, Gary made the decision unilaterally, without consulting HR, without documentation, without following the very policy that required official sign-off for any seating exception. Susan closed the folder slowly. She said this was not a productivity initiative. This was a liability nightmare, and if anyone got injured from standing that long with no proper accommodation, especially someone pregnant, the company could be looking at a lawsuit that would make chair removal look like the smallest problem on earth. I did not smile in that meeting. I kept my expression completely professional. But inside, something settled into place, because I knew exactly what was coming next. By that afternoon, chairs reappeared on the fourth floor faster than they had disappeared. Facilities rolled them in like nothing had ever happened. But that was not the end. Susan requested camera footage from the days the chairs were missing, timestamps, memos, everything, to build a formal file. She also requested a private meeting with Gary, and from what Priya overheard through the thin conference room wall, that meeting did not go well for him. Gary came out of that meeting pale, quiet, completely different from the man who had smiled at the elevator 3 days earlier. He did not talk to anyone the rest of the day. He did not make eye contact with me once. 2 weeks later, Gary was no longer our manager. Officially, the company called it a restructuring decision. Unofficially, everyone in that office knew exactly what happened, because Susan quietly informed department heads that Gary had made an unapproved policy change that put the company at serious legal risk, especially concerning a pregnant employee, and that this was not the first complaint on his file, just the first one backed up with real documentation. The complaint I originally filed about mandatory unpaid lunches was reopened too, now with a manager who no longer had the power to intimidate anyone into silence. HR ended up issuing Gary a formal reprimand alongside a mandatory retraining requirement, and shortly after that, he transferred to a smaller regional office 2 hours away, an office everyone knew was basically corporate exile. Priya got her chair back, plus an actual ergonomic one with lumbar support, approved instantly once real documentation existed. Marcus stopped standing on his bad knee. Walter retired his recycling bin throne with visible relief. And me, I got something even better than a chair. I got proof that the system, slow and frustrating as it can be, actually works when you follow it exactly the way it is written, especially when the person trying to break it never bothered reading the fine print himself. Gary thought malicious compliance was his weapon. He thought forcing people to suffer through a technically legal loophole would make me back down, make everyone back down, make the complaint disappear along with the chairs. What he never understood was that the same policy he twisted to punish us was the exact policy that ended up removing him, because he never actually followed it correctly himself, not once, not for a single day. The last time I saw Gary in that building, he was carrying a small box of desk items, avoiding eye contact with everyone, moving fast toward the elevator like he wanted to disappear before anyone could ask him anything. I sat down at my desk, in my chair, my real chair, and I did not say a single word to him. I did not have to. The silence said everything Gary needed to hear, and for the first time in months, that silence felt like exactly what justice was supposed to sound like.